Have you ever imagined that the last minute of your life could repeat itself over and over again? What would you do if suddenly you found yourself trapped in an endless loop, doomed to relive the same seconds forever? This is the story of a group of friends who, on New Year's Eve, were trapped in a time loop where the 12 chimes didn't announce a new beginning but an end from which they could never escape. This is the story of the last chime. The night was in full swing. In the Jenkins house, the New Year's Eve party had brought together dozens of people. Laughter and excitement filled the air as everyone eagerly awaited the 12 chimes, the moment that would mark the end of one year and the beginning of another. The main living room was filled with music, lights, and the chatter of conversations. Amid the crowd, Lucas found himself staring at the old wall clock that ticked irregularly, as if its presence was not entirely normal. It was an antique clock, the kind found in old houses, with dark wood that seemed to have witnessed more stories than anyone could imagine. "Have you noticed how weird it sounds?" Lucas remarked, glancing at the clock. "Sometimes it makes this strange noise, like it's not marking time correctly." Emma, his friend, looked at him with a nervous smile. "Lucas, always looking for something strange. It's just an old clock." But something in the atmosphere of the house seemed to be changing, as if something wasn't quite right, though no one paid much attention to it. The party continued, the fireworks lighting up the outside sky. No one suspected that on this night, the clock in the Jenkins house would not mark the passage of time in a normal way. The countdown began. Everyone was excited, preparing their glasses of champagne, awaiting the sound of the bells that would signify the end of one year and the beginning of a new cycle. Meanwhile, Lucas couldn't stop watching the clock. As the seconds ticked down, the ticking became more irregular. "This is wrong," Lucas thought. But before he could say anything, the first chime rang out in the house. But it wasn't a normal chime. Instead of sounding forward, as it always had, it sounded backward. A chill ran through the room, and at first, everyone thought it was a technical glitch, an auditory illusion, or perhaps some trick to surprise them. However, the laughter died down when, with the second chime, Thomas, a middle-aged man whom few in the group knew, vanished without a trace. It wasn't like he had walked out the door or disappeared in a trick. No, he simply ceased to exist, as if he had never been there. People looked around, confused, not sure if this was some kind of dark joke. But no one was laughing now. The second chime rang, and with it, another person disappeared. Emily, a close friend of Lucas. No screams, no attempts to escape, just a void of air where she had been. "What just happened?" someone shouted, but panic had already begun to spread. The bells kept ringing, one after another, as if the clock was controlling something far darker than the passage of time. Lucas tried to calm down, looking for a logical explanation, but the dread in his chest was growing. The clock struck the next chime, the third, and with it, another person vanished. David, Emma's boyfriend, was gone. Their eyes met for a moment, full of terror, and she tried to scream his name, but it was futile. He vanished, just like the others, and the cycle continued. As chaos spread throughout the house, Lucas realized that the disappearances were following a disturbing pattern. With every chime, time seemed to fold in on itself, as though they were trapped in a loop. With each new chime, panic intensified. No one knew what was happening or how to stop it. The room was filled with screams as people ran around in every direction, trying to find an escape, but the doors wouldn't open. No matter how hard they tried, time was sealed in that moment. No one could escape. The clock kept ringing, and each chime was louder than the last. The room darkened, and shadows began to move along the floor. Lucas looked around and saw how the few remaining people were desperately trying to comprehend the impossible. Emma clung to his arm, seeking comfort in the midst of growing despair. "Lucas, what's happening? Why is this happening to us?" she sobbed. Lucas didn't have answers. He only felt that time was spiraling out of control and that everything he knew was collapsing. The clock struck again. "We're trapped," Lucas whispered, trembling as he looked around and saw, in the reflection of a mirror, the shadows of the disappeared people moving around them, watching them. The chimes were no longer just sounds. They were a curse. With every ring, it seemed like another person was ripped from reality, leaving them empty, gone, as if they had never existed. Panic spread among Emma and the few who remained, but there was nothing they could do. The clock kept ticking backward, and with every second, someone else vanished. When the fourth chime rang out, Lucas ran to the windows, trying to break the glass to escape, but reality seemed to crumble. There was no way out. The walls of the house were rising like monsters, distorting, stretching, as if the house itself were coming alive. The shadows slithered across the corners, and the clock, relentless, kept ringing, marking each moment of horror. With every new chime, someone else disappeared. The survivors didn't know how much time had passed, whether it had been minutes or hours, because time no longer made sense. Finally, when the last chime rang, Lucas, Emma, and the few who remained fell to their knees. The room was empty, and the clock kept ticking. There was no more sound, but the feeling of terror lingered in the air. No one was left, and the house had become a silent shell. The clock had stopped marking time, but the feeling of dread remained. The shadows, still alive, whispered from the corners of the room. The survivors looked around, and with each passing moment, they began to realize that they were no longer in the same place, nor the same house. Everything had changed. The walls had become darker, colder, and the shadows moved with terrifying speed. This can't be real," Emma whispered, as she watched the figures of their disappeared friends materialize around them. But they weren't the same. They were shadows, echoes of what they once were. Lucas tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the air, as if sound itself were being consumed by the darkness. Something had trapped them in that final minute of the year, and now they were condemned to relive it over and over again, endlessly. When the last chime sounded again, there was no more fear, only resignation. Lucas, Emma, and the others realized they were trapped in a cycle from which they could never escape. The clock had started again, and with it, the horror was unleashed once more. The house, now empty, remained a hollow echo of the past. The clock, suspended in time, continued its task to return those trapped in the last minute of the year, doomed to disappear again and again. No one knew if they would ever escape that cycle, or if they would simply be forgotten, absorbing every repetition of time without end. What would have happened if you could escape this cycle? Perhaps we will never know. But one thing is certain: when the clock strikes 12, make sure you're not near something you cannot control. And if you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, comment on what you thought, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. At Pactostenebrosos, the dark stories never end. They're always waiting to be told,